Good morning.
Morning.
So, this morning we're exploring being guided by Spirit, truly with a peaceful heart, through the Bible story of Joseph that is told in Genesis chapters 37 through 50. So, let me tell you the story first. So, Joseph was the 11th son of Jacob. So, he had 10 older brothers, one younger brother, and a sister. And he was his father's favorite, which didn't go over very well with his older brothers. As you can imagine, sibling rivalry. And Joseph himself didn't really help the situation either, because Jacob would send him out there, a family of shepherds, and taking care of the sheep. Sometimes they were like a couple of days travel away from home. So Jacob would send Joseph to check up on his brothers, and then Joseph would come back and not really give a favorable report about what his brothers were doing. So he became this pesky little brother. And then when Joseph turned 17, Jacob decided to give him what it says in the Bible, a multicolored coat, which was really expensive at the time and was usually reserved for the eldest, which would have been Reuben, but he gave it to Joseph. So all that didn't help. And then Joseph was gifted with prophetic dreams. And Joseph, when you read the Bibles, like from the beginning, it's already stated that Joseph felt really connected to God, felt really connected to the divine, and felt like the divine was working through him and giving him information. So Joseph received two dreams in which, if they interpreted it, looked like his family was bowing down to him. Now, can you just imagine that? It's like your little brother telling you, like, you're going to bow down to me. Because Joseph proceeded to tell the dreams to his family, and they were quite dismayed. So one day, the brothers were out in the fields, tending to the sheep. And Jacob again sent out Joseph to check up on his brothers, and his brothers see him coming with his multicolored coat, and they have just had it. And they said, you know what? This is our chance. Let's get rid of him. Let's kill him. Then we're done. And Reuben, the oldest one, goes like, he's our brother. We cannot do that. And Reuben has a plan. He goes like, let's throw him in the well, in the dry well. And he says to his other brothers, then he can just perish there, as if that is better. But it's like, but Reuben's plan is, then when the other brothers are gone, I just take him out and send him home. So they throw him in the well, take his coat, first, and then throw him in the well. And then Reuben goes off to do something, and in the meantime, a caravan comes that travels through the area where they are, and the other brothers go like, "Oh, we actually can make a profit of Joseph. Let's sell him." And they sold him into slavery. So Reuben is like horrified when he finds out, but there's nothing he can do. And so they rip up the coat, they put some blood on it, send that back to their father, and goes like, we found Joseph's coat, but we don't know what happens. In the meantime, Joseph is sold into slavery. He ends up in Egypt and becomes the slave of Potiphar, who was an officer of the Pharaoh. And it's very interesting because as Joseph works with Potiphar, everything he touches prospers. So Potiphar begins to prosper and he starts to notice and goes like, ooh, this works for me. And he gives Joseph more and more responsibility. And he, acknowledges Joseph and praises Joseph. But Joseph goes like, yeah, this is not my doing. This is my God's doing. So Joseph is still really focused and connected with God. He doesn't see like he does anything. So he has so much success at Potiphar that at a certain point, he's in charge of his whole estate. But Potiphar has a wife. And his wife goes like, that's a really strong young man, and I would love to sleep with him. So she starts to bug Joseph to sleep with her. And Joseph goes like, well, first of all, I don't have permission from your husband, and I cannot do that to your husband because he just gave me, say over all his estate. And secondly, I mean, not even secondly, this is not the value of my God. And I'm not going to do this because that would displease God. But Potiphar's wife won't have it, so she gets back at Joseph and basically tells lies about him, and Joseph ends up in jail. So it's quite a drama. Joseph's story is quite a drama because here's his favorite of his father. He ends up in the well being sold as a slave, has great success, and then he ends up in jail, and he spends quite a few years in jail. But in jail, the same thing happens. Everything he touches prospers, and the warden notices and goes like, wow, that is really nice. So again, the section of the jail where he's in, Joseph, ends up being in charge. There are two servants of the Pharaoh who also thrown in jail, and one is the cupbearer and the other one is the baker, and they both have dreams, and they do not understand what the dreams are, what the dreams mean. And Joseph goes like, oh, I could interpret the dreams for you. Well, my God can interpret the dreams for you through me. And so he does, and he says, like, in 3 days, the cupbearer will be back with the Pharaoh as his servant. In 3 days, the baker, will be killed. And it happens. In 3 days, that is what comes about. And Joseph says to the cupbearer, please remember me. Tell the Pharaoh about me when you get a chance, because I am in jail for unjust matters. But the cupbearer goes back to work and forgets all about Joseph. So Joseph is in jail for 2 more years, and then Pharaoh has a dream. And he cannot interpret the dream. Then he calls the wise men in, and the wise men cannot interpret the dream. And the cupbearer goes like, oh, there is Joseph in jail, and he could do it. So the Pharaoh calls for him. Joseph comes, and he interprets the dream as that Egypt will prosper for 7 years, and then there will be a famine for 7 years. And during the famine, everything will be destroyed. And Pharaoh goes like, oh, that is horrible. But Joseph goes like, no, that is actually fine, because this is what you can do. During the first 7 years, you put part of the food aside, you store it in silos, and then during the 7 years of the famine, you still have food to feed the people. And the Pharaoh thinks that that's brilliant and that Joseph is the wisest man in the land. And he puts him in charge. And so now Joseph is the second in command in all of Egypt. He gets Pharaoh's signature ring. The only one above him is the Pharaoh. So he's literally in charge of everything, and he does a fantastic job. Again, everything he touches prospers. And again, Joseph doesn't take any credit for it and says, like, no, it is God who does all of this. So after 7 years of prosperity, it's like 7 years of famine start. And Joseph starts to distribute the food, but the famine doesn't only happen in Egypt, it also happens in the surrounding countries. So Jacob and his sons are also, they also don't have food, but they hear about Egypt and that there's an abundance of food there and that you can go and buy food. So Jacob sends his sons to go and buy food, but Joseph is in charge of distributing the food. So his brothers come to him. They don't recognize Joseph, but Joseph recognizes them. It's quite a powerful situation Joseph is in right now, right? Because he's the second in command in Egypt, and here are his brothers who are hungry and want food. And Joseph gives them food and is really happy to see them, but he's also testing them. He wants to know for sure that his brothers has a change of heart before he reveals himself. And those tests are not easy. I mean, the brothers could have ended up in jail if they hadn't passed. But they do pass the test, and again, it happens over a few years. And then when the brothers go back home, and then Jacob also comes, and then when they're all there at the court, Joseph reveals himself. And the Pharaoh is very generous. He actually gives land to Joseph's family. Everybody can live in prosperity in Egypt. And then Jacob dies. And the brothers go like, now that our father is dead, maybe Joseph is going to take revenge and he will kill all of us. So they're getting really nervous. And they start sending a messenger to Joseph saying, like, well, your father said on his deathbed that you have to treat us well, which was actually not true, but, they were a little nervous. And then they finally meet again, and Joseph says, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. Because of all that I've gone through, I now have been able to save many, many people. It's a powerful story, right? So let's unpack that. We start at the beginning. So Joseph was gifted with prophetic dreams. When we're guided by spirit, at times we get information or we have like a sense of what to do next, or maybe a sense of what is going to happen. But it really matters how we treat it. So, for example, Joseph told his family about his dreams of his family bowing down to him. No, that might not have been the best timing to do so. And who knows why he did it? Might have been youthful ignorance. It might have been really wanting to connect with somebody about this. It might have been, Joseph felt like it was a gift from God, so why not share it? But when we get information that involves other people, and it actually always involves other people because we're connected, use discernment as to what to do next. Is it appropriate to share it? Is it, does it uplift others when we share it? Or does it become something of the ego because we're looking good or we got information? It's like sometimes I hear people say, very proudly in a sense, it's like, Spirit told me, blah, 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 blah. It's like it kind of like irks me because I go like, yeah, Spirit tells all of us. It's like you're not unique in that. And I've also had people telling me, well, Spirit told me that you should be doing. And I go like, well, Spirit didn't tell me, so why don't I just go with what I'm hearing? You know? And so it is like when we get a message or when we think we get a message, we really need to check with ourselves. First of all, if it is helpful, because it might be true what is happening, but also, is our egos involved? Do we want to look good? Do we want to be better? It's like, are we attached to the outcome? So now it is spirit saying like, is it that we don't have to take responsibility? Because that's also easy, right? Spirit told me to, so now I don't have to take responsibility. So we really need to check it out. So we also need to see, we need to see where we are. Am I in a pure place? Am I detached? The other thing to understand is that we don't always know how it unfolds for the information we're getting. It's like, did Joseph know what was going to happen when he had those dreams in the beginning? No, he just got a piece of information. It was very interesting. It's like when I was 10, my father was sick. My father had cancer. I knew he was sick. I didn't know he had cancer. And he passed away in 3 months. And he was at home. And one night I went to bed and I had a feeling that something was terribly wrong with my father. And so I prayed to God and I prayed that God would do something because I knew something was wrong. And so, God, please help. So I fell asleep. I woke up a few hours later to find out that my father had passed. I was so angry. For years, I was angry at God because in my 10-year-old mind, It was like, God, I warned you, and you didn't do anything about it. Only to get, like literally years later, oh, I didn't get this information because something was going to change for my dad. I got this information so I could prepare myself for what was coming. And a question I could have asked was, okay, if my dad is going to die, now what? And the result would have been not that I wouldn't have grieved, not that I wouldn't have missed him, but I would have been open to a life where, for example, my uncle became my guardian. That was a rule in the Netherlands. It's like my mom was still alive, but because I was a minor, I also needed a guardian. And I could have been much more open to my uncle's family, and I knew they would have taken me in, but I was so held back. And I felt so angry that I couldn't see other possibilities. Now, it's not to blame myself. I was a 10-year-old. And what I got is this is like my lesson in this lifetime. But it's very interesting to think about that. It's like when we get information, it's not always what we like. It's not always what we want to happen. But if we know that we are guided by spirits, and we ask, so if this is to happen, then what? Then what is my role? Then what am I to do? Then we get to see a path forward. And a really simple example was that years later, I was driving my car. It was an older car. I was driving my car on the freeway. And I got this message like, this car is going to break down and you need to buy a new car. And at that time I was with it. And I said, so how long do I have? And I didn't quite get an answer. But the amazing thing, what happened is that I had just read Consumer Magazine like the week before. Literally, it's the only time I read Consumer Magazine. And I had no idea why. And it was all about cars. And I was so interested in it, not knowing why. And I found two cars that if I wanted to buy a car, they would be really good. And then also I got a loan offer that worked really well. So I got the message, and in a week's time, my car broke down, but I was at home. I wasn't stranded. And the next day I had a new car because everything was in place. But I felt like everything was in place. I might have preferred for my car not to break down. But because I was open enough to ask, to let the information in, I was completely set up to deal with it. And it was very easy, right? So when we get information, check, when we feel like we're guided by spirit, check if it is truly guidance, check how you feel. It's like, I know that it can be true guidance when I'm peaceful, when I'm not attached, when I can ask questions, when I can be open to the next step. And then use discernment if it is worth sharing, if it is a good thing to share right now or not, or if it's just information for you. If you get information about somebody else, bless them. It might not be your job to fix it, but you can always bless the situation for the highest and the best. And if there's something for you to do, you will know. But let it come from a place of peace and detachment. So what is another lesson we got from Joseph? I mentioned it a few times. It's like Joseph was very focused on the divine. It seems like in the story that he's really connected with the divine, that his focus is on God, and that he, feels like when his surroundings prosper or when he prospers, that it is not really his doing, that it is God working through him and for him. In the Bible, it says, like, pray without ceasing. And I had a really great experience with that. Again, years ago, I was hiking with a friend from Mere Woods to Stinson Beach, the Dipsy Trail. and then back. So we left early in the morning. We went to Stinson Beach. We hung out there, and we kind of calculated when we had to be back, when we had to go back, in order to be back at the car before it would be dark. So we started hiking back, and then the trail we were going to take was closed. So we had to take another trail, which took longer. And then what we hadn't calculated that once we were in the woods, it was just dark sooner than when we're out in the open. So we ended up hiking in the dark through Muir Woods. And I took the lead for a bit, and I didn't have a flashlight. And, I mean, hiking in Muir Woods in the dark, not particularly my favorite thing to do, but I had an image of God in front of me, and I totally focused on that. I was so focused. It's almost like it was my way of praying without ceasing. So focused on that, and I just went for it. I just hiked, and it was a small path, and my friend was behind me. So we get to the car, and I know that while we were hiking, that the mountain was to my right, went up pretty steep, and I had no idea what was to my left. So I get to the car, and my friend said, "Wow, you really went for it." And I go like, "Yeah." And he says, "Did you know that the path was really narrow and the drop-off was pretty steep on your left-hand side?" And I said, "I had no idea." And what I've really taken from that, it wasn't that I was, irresponsible, but with the information I had and me staying focused on the divine, I was protected because there was no misstep. We were completely safe and we made it to the car, but I was completely focused on the divine. And so, when we're guided by spirit, I think it's important that we stay connected to the divine. It's not like, oh, we get a piece of information and then we just go about our lives. No, it's like, what is our way of praying without ceasing? What do we focus on? So things stay clear for us as to what to do. And then we will be protected. And we don't always know what we might have missed. The next part of what we can learn from the story of Joseph, and that's the realization I just recently had, is like life doesn't always feel good, and that's okay. For some reason, I thought if I really lived a good life, if I was capable, if I had it made, then I would be happy all the time. Thank you for laughing. I appreciate that. Because I don't think that that's what life is. We live in duality and there are ups and downs. And I think it matters more how we label it. Do I label it as bad? Do I label it as good? When emotions come up, do I label sadness as bad? Or is that okay? Or is it neutral? When I'm angry, can that just be okay? Because it gives me information. And it's like, it has been so freeing to allow myself to have life in all its shades and forms and shapes and just go like, oh, yeah, this is interesting. And just notice and not go like, oh my God, I'm sad again. There must be something wrong with me. No, here is sadness. Okay, here is sadness. And again, can I stay in contact with the divine? Can I keep coming back to that? And the more I keep coming back to that, the more peaceful I will feel. The more peaceful I move in the world. And then the last thing is, and this is a line that has really stayed with me, at the end, that Joseph says to his brothers, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. And I really have used this in situations where I felt like I was really in a pickle. I felt really hurt. And I thought, can I affirm that only good comes from this? And has greatly helped me because it is us focusing on the good that comes out of the situation. Joseph forgives his brothers, but not just without discernment. Again, he thoroughly tests them. We don't have to put up with things. But then he's willing to forgive and to let go and really look back at his life and say, if all this hadn't happened, I wouldn't have saved so many people because I could interpret the dream. I would not have been here as the second in command in Egypt. Paula Stone Williams said, "You have been uniquely shaped by the place you held before. Without that place, without that shaping, however painful it may have been, you would not be able to touch people all over the world as you are now able to." Ernest Holmes says, "Nothing is ever lost. We are in the midst of an eternal unfolding, a progressive realization of reality." So, being guided by a peaceful spirit, it's like stay open to the guidance and know for yourself what you need to do to be in that place of peace so that you can truly listen. And you don't have to have the whole picture right at the beginning. Joseph, it's like the story goes from chapter 37 to 50. Joseph didn't know in chapter 37 how the story would end. So can we be peaceful in this moment and trust that we will be guided as to what to do? Thank you.